Welcome to Real Conversations with Patricia Baranovsky-Schneider, the podcast that takes you on a journey around the world to meet some of the most inspiring and accomplished individuals. Discover their stories, uncover invaluable business lessons from their paths to success, and gain exclusive insights on how to apply their strategies to elevate your life and business.
Hello and welcome to Real Conversations with Patricia. I'm your host, Patty Baranovsky-Schneider. Today I'm joined by Hillary Spiritos. So welcome, Hillary. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
I have a business called Bat Outta Hell, which I'm really excited to talk about with you. And I'm really just passionate about working with young adults and helping them figure out where they're going with their lives.
I know some adults need that too.
Absolutely.
So now you describe yourself as a pathfinding coach. So can you tell us what that means and how it differs from traditional life coaching or career coaching?
Absolutely. So I call myself a pathfinding coach because it feels better to me and it feels a bit more natural and it feels a bit more organic. And it feels a bit more in tune with your inner voice and inner life and inner self. I don't necessarily love the term life coach. It seems, maybe that's because when I grew up, it seemed a little bit woo-woo a little bit, but I also think that your life is a path, and I don't necessarily think that I don't really know what a life coach is necessarily. I just think it's helpful to have somebody who can help you navigate your own path.
Right.
And I think that if the path already exists and it's clear for you and you are going through it and there's no brush or twigs or any boulders in the way, then it's probably someone else's path. And generally, so the path that you walk down is going to have obstacles and winding roads and things that you need to navigate. And it's helpful to have someone, a near peer, who can help you navigate your way through it and then teach you the skills and tools that you can use moving forward to navigate yourself.
That's awesome. And it is true. It's kind of like post-COVID, it seemed everybody under the sun became a life coach. And it's like everybody does something different. So I guess life is a broad term. It's like, all right, what exactly are you doing? And you are 100% right. Figuring out the path. I love it. And I've had my share of many obstacles and boulders. So it's good to learn what they mean and how you get around them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, what inspired you to start Bat Outta Hell? And how'd your background in academia and corporate world shape the work that you're doing today?
Absolutely. So I've always known that I wanted to be this type of person for other people. I've always known that I wanted to be of service and a coach or an advisor or a mentor. And I've done that in various roles in my life. And then I was an RA when I was at Duke University in undergrad. And I just loved working with young people and helping them figure out who they are, what they were interested in, what they were passionate about, what they were capable of, where they wanted to go, answering questions. It just really sparked this fire in me. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up working as an academic advisor at NYU and Northeastern in Boston. And I realized that while I loved helping young adults talk about their academic questions, I also ended up having these conversations that were really relationship oriented and really trying to get to the bottom of, why don't you want to take this class? Why do you feel like you have to take this class? Why do you feel like this major is interesting? Why do you feel like that's not good enough? Like all of these questions that surround the choices that we make. And we unconsciously or consciously know the reasons behind these choices, but we make these choices blindly sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so I think during the pandemic, I realized that during this work, I realized that there was this need for this in-between space that wasn't parents, friends, or a therapist, because as well-meaning as those groups hopefully are, they're not objective or can't relate in different ways. And so during the pandemic, I had past students, friends, people from different areas and walks of life asking and reaching out to talk to me. And so I built my business during the pandemic, and it's been going strong ever since.
Nice. I wish people like you were around when I needed it. But it is true, though, because I talk to many people on these shows, and there are some people who follow what the parents had said. You have to be a doctor, you have to do this. Or other people who just think, oh, it's a great paying job. Like I remember back in the day working with two people. One was a lawyer an accountant, went to school to become an accountant, between all of the hard work, the CPA, blah, 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 only to realize afterwards, I don't really like doing that. Think of how much tuition and time was wasted, that he's got to pay this back for the next 100 years. And it wasn't even what he wanted to do. And another person was, no, he was a lawyer. He, again, had to go past the bar, all of that stuff to realize that's not what he wanted to do. So it's like you can save a lot of, and plus, learning it all, spending all that time studying, and you don't have that passion for it, so if someone is there to guide them, that's huge. And even, relationships and whatnot, and
Sure.
figuring out what works best for you and what you want. Because you're right, they don't teach any of this in school. And most parents and people are very biased. They're going to tell you what they think you should be doing, not what you want to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, many young adults today, they feel paralyzed by the pressure to get it right in both their personal and professional lives. So how do you help them overcome the fear of making the wrong choice?
I think the biggest thing that I help my clients do is reframe and redefine these words, because as we're growing up and throughout our lives, we create and learn these stories about what failure is, what success is, what courage is, what all of these words mean. And we create these stories about what is good enough, what is not good enough, what is acceptable, what is it mean for me to be successful, all of that.
Right.
And so I think it's important to define and understand what it means for you, and then recognize and unpack that. Like, why does it mean that way for you? Why does it mean that for you? Do you want it to continue meaning that for you?
Right.
Do you want to live your life with that definition, or do you want to free yourself from that definition?
Mm-hmm.
And that is a long practice. It is reminding yourself over and over. It is rewiring neural pathways. It is trying to talk yourself through things. And I'm absolutely there to help you do that and cheer for you and coach you along the way. But it's absolutely, it starts with unpacking what those definitions and those words are that we hold so tight.
No, it makes 100%, sure. Because, even with I remember, the mentality is to be successful, you have to, climb the corporate ladder and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, and I have kids, they're grown now, and grandkids and all that stuff. But would I want to be a stay-at-home mom? It would be so exhausting. It's so much work, but I don't know if I would be able to do it. But, you could be the most successful, at-home parent, but yet it's not on the realm of that's what's. So yeah, helping people understand that that's your success right there. And you are amazing at it. And how people like me, I could be the CEO of a company and I still couldn't possibly touch what you just did. I mean, it's amazing, but so helping people realize that, I think, is huge.
For sure. And we also have this ability for ourselves as human beings to really just minimize and belittle our own accomplishments. Right. And so my clients find it really helpful for me to call out the times that they have really accomplished something really amazing. And that doesn't mean that they've graduated first in their class or got the huge promotion, or I'm not necessarily talking about huge, big things. It doesn't, sometimes we think that if it's not this huge, giant thing, then it's not worthy of it. Or we also can sometimes feel like, oh, everybody else is doing it, so it's not that special. And it's really important to recognize that you are probably doing a lot more in your life and moving forward in a lot of ways that you're not recognizing or giving yourself credit for.
Yeah. And you boost that up in people, and that just makes them want to do 10 times more, because now it's like they're recognized, I love that. Now let's talk about your signature method, aligned and alive. So what are the core principles of that approach, and how does it help your clients build confidence and direction?
Absolutely. So Aligned and Alive is a 3-month program, and I call it 3 giant steps because it's 3 quote unquote steps, but it's actually a lot of work that gets done. Mm-hmm. And so the first month is we are figuring out what you are interested in, who you are really, what your values are, what you really want your life to look like. And we really try to be as honest and as real as possible, because when you work with me, there's no judgment, there's only empathy, there's only support. Sometimes there's real conversation, and sometimes I push back on things, but it's a safe, secure environment. Yeah. And then the second month is really focusing on our blocks. what is blocking us, stopping us from creating the life we want, imagining the life we want? What is stopping us from going after that and living our fullest, fiercest, most authentic lives? And that's really the meat of it. And that is where the work that I do is different than other coaches, because I truly believe that the way to create and live your fullest, fiercest, most authentic life is to cultivate and develop and figure out and learn a relationship with your inner child. So we get into that work a bit. And then the last month is revisiting what we talked about in the first month, which is, has the vision you want in your life changed? Has who you think you are changed? Has what you value changed? And then we create an actionable strategic plan moving forward so that you can live the life as you want to, but also create a sustainable, fulfilling life. Because what we know is, if you are going after something that is not truly your passion or your interest or what you want to be doing, you're not going to spend your time doing it. You're going to procrastinate. You might not be successful or as successful as you want to be, whatever that word means for you. And it's not sustainable. So that's where we get defeated. So we want to find our core and look inward so that we can build a sustainable life moving forward.
I love the part about your inner child, because I knew somebody too who, they were in the business world just because that's what it was expected of them. And he always said, like, as a kid, like when he finally had kids, he loved helping, that he was so artistic that he just loved doing that. And it turns out that he wound up, almost when it was, time to retire, but he branched out to do what he was passionate about, because that's what his inner child always wanted to do, be creative. And he loved what he did. And then he was retiring shortly after. But it's like, how many years did you waste doing it? Like an unsatisfying job that was not your passion,
Absolutely.
Now, we spoke a little bit about how parents and friends aren't the best people to guide young adults. So why is having a neutral outside voice important at this stage of life?
Absolutely. Great question. So I'm not saying don't ever talk to your parents or friends, of course.
About certain things, yeah.
About certain things, right. But my understanding and the experience and what I've seen is that parents, hopefully well-meaning and hopefully want the best for their children, do not understand how to relate to the world of today. And so sometimes their advice and their understanding of how the corporate world works, how relationships and dating works, how all of that, how you navigate the world of today is not accurate. And sometimes that can be either frustrating or just not helpful. And then friends, again, very helpful to bounce ideas off of all of that and helpful for support, hopefully. But they're going through it the same as you, and they're not objective, and they're coming at it with their own biases, right? As parents are. So that's not necessarily the most helpful when you're trying to figure out who you are really. And then I often find that people go straight to therapy. And while I'm a big proponent of therapy, I think it's very helpful. You might not have a mental health condition that needs to be diagnosed. You might not need to be pathologized. You might just need someone to talk to and help guide you through this and answer any questions and help support you. So I think that I operate in this unique in-between space, which can be very helpful for my clients. And so I'm also a near peer. So I've gone through what they're going through in today's world and can help them navigate. I also just want to say it's also very important to take time to look inward and not ask anybody. So it's as much as I think clients get a lot from talking to me and the testimonials and all these things speak for themselves, and it's very important to have a community around you. It is critical that you take time and energy and space to look inward without any outside influences and see, am I actually interested in doing this? Or is this something that I just feel like I should be doing? Should is the enemy, right? So that's just really important. I just want to note that.
Right. But even something like that, most people wouldn't think of that unless they were told. Like, I love when people say, okay, almost like, here's internal notes, or here's notes that I want you to do. I wouldn't have even thought to say, okay, well, it's just you go through the motion in life. This is what you were told to do. This is what you have to do. Here's my responsibilities, and just suck it up. That's what you have to do. But no one ever says, but take 5 minutes and think about that. Does that actually make you happy? Like, I wouldn't have thought about it because it's not on my list of things to do today. So,
Yeah.
it is good to have somebody help guiding you. And I agree how an outside person, because sometimes even with friends, they don't want you to leave. So they're going to kind of tell you what's going to keep you around them too, because we're partners. We're going to, like, I knew somebody else who, two of the friends had gotten married, had kids, and he didn't. So now he wants them to still do the same stuff. It's like, but life changes, it moves on. And I agree 100% with like the parents, and that, times change, evolve, the whole new generations, it's completely different. And, trying to navigate it, we try to wing it sometimes, but it's like, I don't understand like half of this stuff. It's like, you need to hear it more from someone in your age range.
Sure. And I think it's also very helpful for me to tell clients, like, nobody has it all figured out. There's no such thing to figure out. There's this idea that someone has it all together, right? What is it? Who has it all? Who do you think has it all together? Is that even a real person? Is that an Instagram thing that like isn't their reality?
Yeah.
So I think it's very, very important and very helpful to remember that. And I definitely make sure that my clients recognize that perfection, this idea of this perfect life, this idea that we have it all together in one day, we're going to master it, and we're never going to feel behind. We're never like, that's just not going to happen. But what you need to do, and what will help you live your life the way you want to, but also just be a little bit easier on yourself, and also just have a more enjoyable life and not take it all too seriously, is to recognize that if you're doing exactly what you want to be doing at that moment, because of course that can change. If you're listening to yourself, I teach my clients how to be kind to themselves. That's something that we work on. It's these tools, how to be resilient, how to stand alone, how to cultivate your own voice, these kind of things that we work on.
Yeah, life's a journey. You want to make it the best journey, but not, one where at the end on your dying day where you're like, wow, that whole ride sucked. You want to at least be able to say, I enjoyed it. I, felt I contributed something,
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you work with a generation that's constantly navigating the noise of social media and unrealistic expectations. So how do you coach young adults to block out that noise and tune into their own values and goals?
Absolutely. So I have a very mixed view of social media. I do not believe it is this big demon completely. Right. I do think there is joy in it. I do think there is support in it. And I do think there's connection and community in it. Right. But what's important, I think, and I try to tell my clients this, is to remember that that's not reality, and to not measure your life on someone else's social media presence. And it is also important to take breaks. It is important to get off your phone for a while. This generation, there's this term, brain rot, which is just like doom scrolling, right? And you're just kind of mindlessly doing it. And I think what we want to do is try to curtail and stop mindlessly doing that, because then you're not necessarily looking at it with a conscious eye. And I also think it's important to recognize in all areas of life, not just social media, but what anybody else is doing. Parents, friends, teachers, me, like anybody else is doing, has no bearing on what you're doing. And so it's all academic. It doesn't matter anymore, right? So like what that person over there in Arizona is doing doesn't necessarily make a difference in what you're doing and how you want to live your life. And I think it's important to separate that. And I also just think it's important to recognize that as much community as we can get in social media, I don't believe it is a substitute for real connection. And so I think it's important to build social skills, communication skills, build friendships, because we are living through a loneliness epidemic. And it is interesting that there is a loneliness epidemic when social media is just like rampant. And that means that it's not making people feel necessarily connected, because when, a day comes, their birthday comes, whatever, they don't have anyone to talk to. That is really disappointing, can be very heartbreaking. So we want to try and build and forge real connection.
I know even with like business wise, like networking events, like everybody was doing the Zoom thing, but when people started having live ones, even if it's just an hour, it was like, wow, it's so much different, because we got to actually sit down and have a conversation and see their reactions. And, it's so much better. So I think the world is craving it more. That's why I guess even with like hybrid work and whatnot, people just feel that you need to be around other people, physically be around other people. So
Absolutely. It is a real mood booster. It makes you feel, and getting outside and getting exercise, living your life outside
right.
is, whether it's outside in nature or whether it's taking an art class or
Right.
whether it's, whatever,
Yeah.
but just getting outside of yourself.
Yeah.
I know that I just said it's important to look within, which it
Yeah.
still hold true to that. But, it's also just really important to get outside of yourself and know that there is this big life and people walking around doing all types of things, living really interesting lives. And I've had a lot of conversations with clients where, a lot of people end up in jobs that they find interesting because they've just met some person that they like found out what they were doing. Then they got this job, then they got this job and this connection. And so that's really how life works. And especially now with this AI world, it's very important to kind of build those soft skills, quote unquote, because I do believe that that is what's going to be looked for in the upcoming years, because AI is going to take all the machines.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we always say, AI is taken over so much, but I mean, just to have that, personal people skill sort of thing, it obviously can't do that. It could wing it, doesn't, it's not sincere, you're not going to get that unless you're talking to an actual live person.
Absolutely.
So now, can you share an example of a client transformation, someone who came to you feeling lost and emerged with clarity and direction?
Absolutely. So I recently met with a client who was preparing to do their med school applications. They had finished undergraduate college. They studied biology. They were just en route to go to medical school. And they just felt like they didn't know why, but something wasn't right. And they weren't able to finish their med school applications. And their parents were pretty upset, and they needed kind of either a push in the right direction or to help them figure out why they were struggling with this.
Right.
And through meeting with me and through our conversations, as similar to what we've talked about, it was very clear that they actually didn't want to go to medical school at all. They actually wanted to go into business, but their parents really felt like being a doctor was the best way to be successful and to get value in the world.
Right.
And it was also a piece of safety. Like, if you're a doctor, you're safe. That's fine. That's good. You'll make a good living, all of that. And so they ultimately decided to not fulfill that part of the brief. They ultimately decided to not go to medical school and apply to medical school, and decided to start looking for other jobs. And we looked into the field of business. We also explored different fields that they might be interested in. And one thing that I really loved was that they ultimately decided to have this real honest conversation with their parents. And I coached them through that. And that was a real eye opener for them, because it was just, they took what their parents said was gospel. They understood that what other people thought about their life was the most important thing. They believed that somebody else outside of them knew better about what they should be doing, knew more about their own life than they did. And so it was really beautiful to watch them really take control of their life in that way.
Right. It is funny because I see that even like personally, and then people are comparing, well, my kid did this, your kid isn't doing that, or, my kid will grow up and be something, but your kid, and I hope that I try to portray to kids, you answer to you, you do what's best for you. It doesn't matter. Like, even at one point, my kids wanted to go to school one wanted to be a fashion designer, one wanted to be a DJ. Everybody else was like, are you crazy? If that's what they want to do, they got my support. If it's not, they fall on their face, at least they tried and they learned it themselves. Like, I can't tell them, because I had that. I had parents who were telling me, this is what you have to do. And, it was like a perfectionist. If I got a 90 on a test, you should have got 100. I just always say, if you pass, that's great. And I support you, whatever you do. Neither kid wanted to pursue it, or they tried to pursue, but never really. But at least you tried it. You have nothing, at least you can look back and say, well, I gave it a shot, it really wasn't my thing.
Absolutely.
But people are always quick to judge and tell you what you should and shouldn't do. You answer to you. What makes you happy? I support you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on something really beautiful, which was whatever happens, you've learned something about your life, and you've learned something about yourself and your place in the world, and you've learned something about what you're capable of. Oh, I can go outside of my comfort zone. I can try something new. I can put myself out there and either survive and figure it out, or thrive. You can learn that you love that thing actually, and maybe you pursue that. But just like your children, maybe you pursue it and you actually realize it's not for you. There's no shame or anything negative in that. I've tried it. I've learned it. I've put myself out there, realize it's not actually for me, but at least I've learned something. Right. And I feel like sometimes a lot of my clients, there's this fear of, and just young people that I speak to, there's a fear of trying. There's a fear of trying something because they're worried that they're not going to be successful. And again, you have no idea what's going to happen. You might actually love it. You might actually hate it. You might be really good at it. You might learn how to be good at it. No one starts being good at something. It's always just, that's what the fun part of it is. And so if you kind of dive into the unknown with the idea of either I win or I learn, right? And that's what I try to instill.
Because even if they tried it and they realized, wow, I thought this would be so much different. Well, I could have told you that, but you needed to see it for yourself and learn it.
And then you don't look back and regret. You go, oh, I tried it and I learned I didn't love it, or it was different than I thought.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, you're passionate about redefining success. So what do you think we get wrong about success, and how can we shift the mindset, especially as young people enter the workforce?
Great question. I do think that success and a lot of these words, failure and courage, those are three words that I find really interesting and important. I think we look outward for those definitions. We look for people to bestow it on us. Somebody else thinks I'm successful. I look successful to somebody else. I have more money. I have more property. I have more degrees than somebody else. And I think that's a huge thing that we get wrong, because really, as we've spoken about, it's your internal definition. Do I think what I'm doing is meaningful? Do I enjoy it? Am I doing what I want to be doing at this moment? Do I have the privilege of figuring it out? This is why I think, we want to start looking inward for the answers rather than outward. That's the biggest thing. And we want to be our own barometers for everything. Everybody thinks Harvard is the best university. Would I want to be in Harvard? Is that the experience that I want to have? Everyone thinks that working on Wall Street is huge. Everyone thinks that I should date this person. Who do you want to date? Where do you want to work? Do you want to be an artist? Why is that, does that society not deem that as successful? Why does it matter that society deems it as successful? We do want to, in the work that I do does dig into this. Why are we feeling so connected to what other people feel about ourselves? What is behind that feeling that we need to, what are we trying to prove? Who are we trying to be successful for? And I also think it's really important to recognize that, similar to what we have spoken about earlier too, you're never going to win that race. So sure, you might get a lot of money from working in a certain industry. Someone else will have more money. If that is what you believe is success, you're going to be chasing that dragon. That's not to say you can absolutely value money and you can absolutely want to make money. And there's nothing wrong with that. And your values can be whatever you want. I'm not saying don't value these things, but there's always going to be someone who you feel is a little bit ahead of you. And then we dig into, what does that mean? What does that look like? Why do you feel like they're ahead of you? What is ahead? Do you feel like you're behind? What's this race? What are we running towards? So it's all part of that larger conversation. It's digging into, again, those stories.
You're true though. Yeah, it's true. You'll never stop, if you're reaching, and you hear people, on their dying days again, they're kind of like, they were going, go, go, go. You never reach the top, but then it's kind of like, okay, but look at everything I missed along the way because I was so focused on that. And it's funny, most younger people won't understand it until, they get there. But I always love that person who goes against the grain. Everybody
Sure.
said they should do this. Everybody said they should be with it. And they're just like, that's not what I want to do. And I'm always like such a badass. I love that because they did what was true to them, and it's not something that most people do. So people have to realize, no one's going to look, I mean, you'll get a handful of people who look down on you, but do they really matter? Everybody else is going to be so courageous. Wow, look what they did.
Well, I think that's really fascinating, isn't it? Because most of the time, people are in awe of people who go against the grain.
Yeah.
Most of the time, people celebrate, people are really proud of you, people think it's so cool, people are really excited for you. Most of the time, you are met with positivity. Of course, there are going to be people who are negative, and the faster you can and more reflective you can be about that has nothing to do with me, that's a projection that they have for their own lives, then the better off you'll be. But what's really interesting is most of the time people really respect it.
Right.
People think it's pretty cool.
I do.
And
I think it's awesome.
I do too. And it's, again, it can be a variety of different things. I'm not necessarily, I'm really an advocate for living your life as you want to.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm, again, not saying everyone needs to quit their job and go live on a commune or be or like make the biggest change.
Right.
As long as I'm happy for you to stay in your hometown and like marry your high school sweetheart and and work for your father. Like, if you are happy doing that,
Right,
if that is true to you, that's wonderful.
Right.
So I think that's really interesting. It's a really interesting conversation. And we also, I think about this a lot. There are all these musicians and all these artists and all these people that we revere that we think they're so cool because they have gone against the grain and done something different and done something new. And actually, if they do the same thing over and over again, we call them a sellout. But we expect ourselves to just never try something different or never veer off. And I think that's just a really interesting thought.
Yeah, no, I give everybody all the credit in the world for doing all that, and it is true. Yet here we are doing the same work, 9 to 5, blah, 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 doing the same thing every day. But that's what everybody says you're supposed to do. Well, who's this everybody? They paying my bills? No. So what do we care?
Yeah. Who is the everybody? Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned helping young adults reclaim their 20s and 30s. So what does that look like in action? And why do you think so many people feel stuck during what should be a vibrant time of life?
Yeah. I think that young adulthood is always challenging. And I think that's true for every generation. However, I do think that this generation of young people has a lot going on that is very different than previous generations that makes it more challenging. And whether that is social media or the COVID pandemic or helicopter parenting that is more around than previous types of parenting, whether that's the broken systems in place that we have around the world, whether that's climate change, social unrest. I mean, there is a lot going on that young adults are trying to find their footing in a world that is constantly shifting under their feet and constantly telling them what they should be doing, what they should look like, what they should want, all of that. And so I'm interested in helping young adults in this age group reclaim their ownership of this young adult time, because this is when you can have those experiences. This is when you can take those chances and try something new and go in a different direction and start your life out on a different note. Because while you can absolutely turn around at 50 or 60 or 70 and decide that you want to try something new and that you weren't necessarily living the life you wanted to be living, you can absolutely do that. And people do that all the time. And that's wonderful. But why not try to get on the foot of figuring that out earlier so that you can live the majority of your life the way that you would like to.
I agree 100%. And, it's like I said, I wish we had people like you back in my day because it would have saved me a whole lot of time.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, right. So now if you can give one piece of advice to someone listening right now who feels like they're behind or unsure of their path, what would you tell them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, one piece of advice is tricky, but I do think it's important to recognize that don't ever think the rules come from outside of you. And it's what we've talked about over and over again, which is you make the decisions about your life. You make the rules. You take ownership of your life. And it is so incredibly, profoundly life-changing and uplifting and strengthening and makes you feel like a badass and makes you feel amazing and in control of your life when you realize that you are the captain of your ship and that you decide to opt in your life. And that doesn't mean that it's all going to be easy. That doesn't mean that it's all going to be that's all going to be successful again, right? Whatever that means. But it's take responsibility for your mistakes, go big, try something new, and you decide. And I think that's the big thing that I would say. It was just easier said than done. I fully recognize that.
No, but so many people, it's true. You go from listening to your parents to listening to your boss, then you're married. And if it's listening to the husband or listening to the wife, listening to the kid, and it's almost like at the end of the day, you feel you're just going through the motion. But if you listen to yourself, and again, if you're with a job, I always admired, like, I just had a conversation with someone earlier about like listening to like employees and stuff like that. I just love hearing the new views on things. And maybe I'll agree, maybe I won't. Sometimes they'll say stuff and it's like, wow, I didn't think about that. I actually like that. Or sometimes I say, no, I get what you're saying, but here's why that won't work. But it's still,
Sure.
I just love the different takes but again, you have to have that voice, speak up, and it can't hurt none,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, anything else you want to add that we didn't already talk about?
Oh, wow. Yeah,
On the spot.
I think I'd like to, one thing I'd like to say is that paths are windy, and I think it's very important to give yourself the opportunity and the time and space to change. And so I think that sometimes we get into this idea that once we make a decision and once we think we figure it out, we're just going to go on that road. And I think we need to allow ourselves the opportunity to, oh, I'm realizing that I actually like this thing a little bit more. I'm realizing that I don't love this anymore. Or realize that it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to pivot. There's a power in the pivot, and to really, and that comes with listening to yourself. And I do want to say that a lot of what we talked about in this conversation is easier said than done. But in working with me, clients can really, we work on these tools. We work on getting stronger in these areas, and we do it with humor, right? We do it. It's a fun experience. This is not like life or death. This is a real joy to have these conversations. And I just want to say that you'll get there. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, and it's always fun finding out something new about yourself that you didn't even know, because again, I'm ingrained in my head, strict parents, Catholic school, upbringing, blah, blah, blah. You introduce your to, and you never had a chance to think about, well, what is it I like? It just wasn't part of the regimen, So when you learn something new about yourself, you're like, it's so cool. I didn't realize that I actually am passionate about this. And so it's a learning experience through the whole process. And at the end of the day, the whole goal is that you're happy,
Absolutely. That's the goal. That's the goal.
Now, how could people get a hold of you or learn more about you?
Absolutely. So my website is Hillary at batoutahell.net. And that's BATOUTTAHELL. And my name is Hillary with 2 L's. And you can also find me on TikTok at bat.outta_hell. Instagram is the same. And I'm happy to have a conversation about consultation call about this work, about who I am, see if we vibe. And we can also talk about having more of a long-term, like building sessions together.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again for being on the show. Again, that was Hillary Spiritos. So thanks for listening to Real Conversations with Patricia. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the channel, and be sure to click the bell notification to see new episodes. So thank you again.
Thank you for listening to Real Conversations with Patricia, talking with some of the most brilliant minds on their journey to success and their recommended strategies. Please leave your feedback and visit pristineadvisors.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Feel free to let me know your thoughts, suggestions, and anything else you'd like me to cover. Together, we can make success happen for all.